Hey, in this video, we're going to hear from Billy Whittaker. Billy runs Bronco Power Boost, and he was gracious enough to allow me to record a conversation that we had where I was having some discussion about the discovery process of what it is he's trying to accomplish. Billy's a great case with Bronco Power Boost, where he has a new technology that is gaining traction in the commercial world, in the international market, and in the municipal world. But he's not yet at the federal level. And we talk through what his approach is. And Billy's approach reflects that of a lot of startup companies where they have a great idea, they know they're out ahead of the market, and they're trying to do a lot of things at once. It will be clear in our conversation that Billy's a high energy guy. He's the founder of this company, so he's emotionally attached to the product, and he's having success. And now he's becoming a bit of a victim of his success because he has limited staff and he's not yet ready to service the channels that are beginning to open up for him. And so I'm having a conversation with him about the potential to move into the federal space to provide Bronco Power Boost to agencies like FEMA, for example, where they buy systems for disaster response. And Billy has had some exposure to very senior levels of government, and he gained that exposure through a connection who happened to be a political fundraiser, a senior and savvy business person who had Washington connections, brought Billy into meetings, and Billy quickly recognized that this was a different animal than selling to something like a state municipality or a county level acquisition authority. And that's a common recognition to realize that the game is played differently at the federal level. The stakes are higher because the dollar values are bigger. The timelines associated with maturing a contract or maturing an acquisition to the point where it can be put on contract, that process takes a little bit longer. And the players are many. It's not any one person. I talk regularly about the constellation of people in the acquisition space associated with at the federal level. So we're going to listen to Billy tell his story. You're going to see how I guide him, how I let him run a little bit with his own words. And I try to help him see that this playing field is different. We don't bring the meeting to an actual conclusion, which is a fairly representative conversation. When I interact with companies, it may be that the issue is so clearly recognizable that it can be brought to a culminating point in the form of a plan of action within an hour or so. Sometimes it takes multiple conversations over the course of a couple of days. Sometimes it takes place over the course of months, where companies are going off and doing some homework. They come back to me. We look at it again to see is the timing right. But by taking our time to examine where we are and where we're trying to go, we help to make sure that we get that alignment that is so critical and federal. And we don't rush to have a meeting too early. You'll hear Billy talk about his revelation in a prior meeting where he recognized that he didn't really have all the pieces in place and wasn't ready to have a conversation. And when you get there too early, you can blow your opportunity, because getting the second meeting after you weren't ready for your first one is always difficult, and sometimes it never comes. So let's go learn from Billy Whittaker at Bronco Power Boost. As is typically the case, I'm on the road when I'm talking to a client or a prospect. So you got some hotel room in the background here. I wanted to just talk through what you're working on, and as you know, we're going to record this, and then we'll condense it down so people can see it. But I'm doing it so that people can see the kinds of questions that I typically ask, and how I try to help you see the playing field into which you're selling when you're working with the federal government. And so I wonder if you could kick it off by just describing briefly your technology in your own words.
Okay, and I got a couple of questions before we get started, if that's okay.
Sure.
Just to make sure I go down the right avenues.
Yeah, I'm going to pause recording here.
Right.
Okay, so picking it back up, Billy, I want you to just sort of describe your technology and where it applies, and then I know you have commercial and nonprofit and federal markets in mind. I just want to see the umbrella of what that activity could look like, and then let's take it from there.
Okay, so right now our biggest project, or the term of the day for Bronco, is resilience and resilience plan. And with that, what we have is our Bronco Power Boost, which is a battery powered home automatic generator that doesn't need anything added to it. In other words, it's an electrical panel that's easily installed beside the electrical panel in less than a couple hours. It's no maintenance. Once we put it in, I've got customers over 311 states that I don't hear from anybody. And when I do call to check up on them, I get basically the same answer. In your world, Billy, you don't want me to be calling you, because as long as it's working, we don't need to call you.
I just want to clarify, you said 311 states?
Yeah, over 300 units now in operation.
Okay, so over 300 units in how many states?
About 11 states now.
11 states. Okay, I missed. I was hearing 311. I'm glad we clarified that. I was like,
that's right. So in other words, we've now been going long enough that we can take from, what works and how we can improve, and getting feedback, and like anything, experience. So I'm going to start with what we call the resilience plan. And that's the big one that I'm reaching out to you, is because we're dealing with government agencies. So what happened was I'm working with a group out of Tennessee called Tennessee Renewable Energy, TREE-DC. And that organization is part of University of Tennessee. And basically their project, or what they do, is they go to small towns and cities in Tennessee, and they help out with different ways that they could save energy, save money on energy, these type of proposals. We are the first product in 13 years of TREE-DC's existence that they've actually taken and put us on the front page and say, we've tried it, we've been there, we support whatever we can do to help Bronco.
So you, just to clarify, you have no doubt that your technology works. It's not a PowerPoint slide. This is an actual piece of equipment that does what you say it does, and you have specific use case, installed use cases, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Okay. Now, as you can imagine, it all started way back then, as the story goes. I'm an electrician. I had a small electrical company in Nashville, Tennessee. I was installing gas generators, and all of a sudden I'm realizing my permits are getting denied by the HOAs for two reasons: noise ordinance of the gas generators, and lot line issues. And the lot line issues more came from the county in the cities, because they're starting to be concerned with, as houses become closer together, the firemen cannot run between the homes in an emergency with these big generators stuck out on the sides. So I literally took what was a problem for me and came up with a solution. I built it on the wall of my garage. I turned the power off, and boom, it worked. And I said, okay, I'm on to something that's going to work for me. So I really built this for me, and then it's just blown up from there, to the point of maybe I need to see about a patent, because it's, to me, it wasn't that complicated of a solution. It just all came together. When I went to see about patent pending breezed right through, and I got the patent pending.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It usually takes about a year and a bit to get the full patent and utility patent. And I got the full utility patent in less than 6 months. Total granted, no issues, first time through.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because they realized what I did was simple and makes sense. Lots of people have tried to do it, but it's kind of like it happens to be my timing was perfect. In other words, when I built the first Bronco and put it on the wall to do backup, to back up our system at home, I put my refrigerator on there and I had 4 100-pound batteries on the floor of the typical solar rechargeable batteries. When I turned the power off, the Bronco kicked in. It ran my refrigerator about 3.5 hours. And right away, we're thinking, nobody's going to want this because you just leave your refrigerator door closed and you're good for 3 hours. That's when I started dealing with the lithium, the new technology of the lithium battery, how it works, why it lasts better. And that with my project of using an inverter, with the old batteries, when you turned it on, the voltage instantly starts to go down, on a plane like that.
Okay, let me pause you. Let me pause you right there, just so we don't go too deep into the technology. Okay. When you went through the patent process, did you get professional help to do that?
I hired a lawyer, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
A patent lawyer.
So you didn't try to navigate that piece of the bureaucracy on your own.
Everything. So everything from my point of view is I realized over life with different things that I've tried and done and so forth is that I know what I'm good at, so I know my strengths, but I also know the things that I'm not good at and I need help. So one of the things that I decided when I was going to do Bronco was I was going to make sure I went to the right people and asked for help, and that we were going to do everything one step at a time and do it properly. In other words, if I couldn't have got a patent, we wouldn't have went further. So then the next step, of course, is UL approval. Being an electrician, I know to get anything inspected or to be covered by insurance, it must be UL approved. Excuse me, that was my next step. That was very successful without getting too long of a story. Typical UL approval for what I was doing, which is called UL 9540, meaning a battery backup system.
So this is Underwriter Laboratories, the little seal of approval.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and you have to have that if you're going to install anything connected to electricity, or else they won't inspect it. Or if there's a problem, your insurance won't cover you. So again, I wanted to do everything correct. When I called to get a quote from them for what I needed, they said $225,000 to $250,000 it would cost, and about a year and a half to 2 years.
Wow.
I then took that knowledge and I searched and I learned and figured out that, and I found that there's a company called ETL, Intertech, and that they do the same testing of the UL 9540. So they use the same booklet information.
Standard.
Standard, yes, the UL standard, but they do it at a more reasonable price. And what I did was when I made the deal with them, I said, normally when you do this, you go through the physical unit, you find an issue, you ship it back, I fix it, ship it back. That's why it takes a year or more. Okay. I said, what if I'm willing, if you let me, I'm going to bring my Bronco and I'm going to come into your testing lab. And as you test, I'm physically going to move, change, and work with you so we can do this in one step. We were able to get the Bronco UL approved in 6 visits, which was less than 2 months. So as we're going, we took all the right steps so that now I can go to my resiliency plan, which I'm going to jump to, so we don't get too technical. And basically what Tree DC was asked by the mayor of Woodland Mills, Tennessee was, could you help put together a resiliency plan for our small town? We don't want to wait till we have a problem. We would like to have the solution and have a resilience plan ahead of time.
So their concern, Billy, just to clarify, is significant loss of power to a community. They wanted people to be able to work through that kind of utility disruption.
Correct. So
Yeah.
a couple of points for those people were they have a fallout shelter for their community. It's, a community center. The community center, first of all, if everybody lost power for whatever reason, they all had to go from their homes and get to the community center.
Right.
Secondly, the community center had no backup power. So the first thing was, Billy, what can the Bronco do to provide backup power for our big facility? So, we went through the details and what it would take, and, it would take a few Broncos and we could do the heat and lighting and the whole thing.
So I'm gonna ask us to skip ahead a little bit, because I think you've demonstrated that the product is successful in the field and satisfies the technical requirements and is certified by Underwriters Laboratories. Are you working to expand in the commercial market as a result of that effort?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We have several avenues. I'm going to quickly go through Woodland Mills and where that went and then move on. So Woodland Mills has now said, provide us with a quote to put a Bronco in every one of our residents' homes. What we want to do is we want to use COVID money to do a pilot project to do 10 units. That would go in our critical care people, elderly, and people that have, some sort of machinery that they would need to survive in an outage, whether it be dialysis and that stuff. Then what we did was we went with them for the grant writing. The grant writing is for the rest of the homes. And, again, for me and with your help, it was great to go in and learn how that process works. So for us, and to deal with, with your knowledge and so forth, is now we have 30 different mayors in Louisiana alone that have contacted Bronco that said, we would like to set up the same project as you did with Woodland Mills. We would like to have Broncos in our homes. Will you come and talk to our council and so forth and help us get grants?
These are municipalities who are using a combination of state funding and federal funding that has flowed to the state that they have access to.
Correct.
Just to differentiate that.
Okay. That's the way I understand it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's my part of learning with you is, how can you help me help them, because they want the Broncos. They know that, they've already in most cases, especially Woodland Mills, we already have a signed resolution that passed their council that they are now going into the funding stage. So that would be one avenue that, I could come to yourself and say, can you help me with this so I can help them in funding? And it's also federal from what I understand. All right, so I won't go any further on that one. I'll jump around a little bit for you on some of the other avenues.
Tell us about you have an international effort underway. Somehow you have connected with Cameroon.
Yes, so a company called IBO, a nonprofit, came to my office in Texas, and they said, we are responsible for 2.7 million children, refugee children in Jordan, Syria, and some of Africa. We put together a project the last 3 years where big corporations like Coca-Cola donated cell phones and laptops that we could take to these children that are sitting there doing nothing and help them, feel like they can do something and actually learn, whether it be, just go online and learn English, whatever. They forgot one major thing, two actually. They forgot that they don't have any electricity, and they didn't realize that they didn't have Wi-Fi available. So he asked me, with your Bronco, we'll send them over there. And I said, that won't work. Give me a couple of days. And what I did was I designed a construction trailer that we can build here in the US with solar on the roof, satellite Wi-Fi, and basically a small office that we can send over pre-built for these children to use. Just turn it on, let the sun shine. The Bronco will provide the power for their cell phones and laptops and will give them Wi-Fi to the world. That was the first major step that got me involved with the nonprofits. That went a step further. The head of that nonprofit happened to be Dr. Kurt Rhodes, who, when we did our Zoom like this, he said, Billy, did I hear you say you could put a small refrigerator in these units for the children. I said, yes, sir. He said, I know you don't know who I am, but I'm one of the founding members and a big part of Doctors Without Borders. And he said, not that we want to leave the children out, but if you could do your trailer, your Bronco trailer, with a small refrigerator and a freezer, my brain goes to, now we can take that trailer with vaccines in the fridge and freezer, and we have doctors that would go into communities they haven't went into in 25 years because they haven't been able to get the vaccines all the way there without there being an issue.
So Billy, for that use case, who is your buyer? How do you make money at that?
So the buyer for that right now, so there's a group set up, those people that came to me as a big organization, and they're working with a village it's actually 33 villages in Cameroon, Africa, called Oku. This Oku, they've already got a big project started, and they've inserted Bronco into the project and said, we would like to add your trailers that are now medical trailers that I built to make it look like a little doctor's office, still runs off of the solar, has the refrigerator and freezer for vaccines. So the nonprofit takes this project to different companies in the US, like Gates Organization, all of these, philanthropy type people, and they say, this is what we're doing. Where can you help us? So we just did phase 1 of that, in which when I learned about Africa, and I'll try to go quick here, as I learned about Africa, and I'm speaking to the king, which is called the Fawn of Oku, and he's looking at me and explaining how wonderful this trailer is going to be to help them since they have no electricity. So for me, I had to understand, you have no electricity ever. No, sir. We live in a hut, literally in a hut like you would see in a movie. So then my brain, I designed a new product for those people. So for every hut, I designed what we call the Cameroon kit, which comes with a small solar panel, a hand crank that you literally can charge a cell phone by hand, batteries, lights, and all these different items. And with that, what it means is each one of those homes or huts has a cell phone that's given to them by the government for emergency use. I have a picture that shows 70 cell phones plugged in one receptacle in the city that they have to send somebody on a 10-mile hike just to charge their cell phones.
So Billy, how many of those are installed internationally right now?
None. So
None.
We just closed the deal today. For the finances just came today. Okay. And what we did was we're sending 7 of those to the upper people in Cameroon, and those are going to be shipped next week. Thank you. Okay. Now, go ahead. Sorry.
Maybe we could shift to federal now, because you clearly have good entree into state and municipal. You have some international NGO, non-governmental organizations connections, and you see a maybe federal emergency response or
yes. So we have
FEMA type connection.
Yes, absolutely. So a week and a half ago, we along with TDC and myself, we had a meeting with the head of TEMA, Tennessee Emergency, like the FEMA, but for Tennessee. Yeah. And as we sat down and we spoke about the Bronco itself for, what we would call for residents, the first thing that he said is, have you ever put one of these outside? I said, yes, sir. We have many outside on residents, that the panel's on the outside. So we have an outdoor unit, in other words. And he said, perfect. What we have an issue with right now is our communication towers, our cell towers. The problem that they're running into, and not so much a problem, but issues they're having, is they did a deal with Kohler generators on a gas generator that sits at these places as an emergency. But because the towers, as you can imagine, are always located in hard to get places, it's costing them a fortune to do the maintenance on it quarterly.
And Billy, maybe you can help me. Kohler is pretty big in the portable generator world, right? I mean, we know them in the U.S., but they're a German company, correct?
No, I
Or
think
European?
I think it's a huge company here. I know they do almost every, if you walk into that bathroom in there, I guarantee it says Kohler on the toilet. So they do a wide range of things. They're the third, and they could be out of Germany originally. I believe they're the third largest generator company in the world at this point.
Yeah, I think you'll find there's an international parent.
Yeah, okay. I'm actually going to know that as of tomorrow. I'm heading to Las Vegas, and that meeting is with Kohler.
Excellent.
So they've reached.
Let's study up on that one. Let's.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Okay. So where was I with? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
We're trying to approach FEMA after having established connection with TEMA.
Yes. So TEMA gentleman says, about, they have the Kohler there and the maintenance, and for the towers themselves, the power that they require is very minimal. So, for the Bronco, it'd be perfect. It stays charged, no maintenance. It's a third of the cost of that. So for them, it's not just the cost; it's the fact that we have a program in our Broncos that if they wish, we could put every one of those Broncos to where they go onto their own website that's designed just for them, and they can look at every Bronco generator in their system, and it will tell them online, offline, what the battery's sitting at, if the power's out, what it's running, the whole 9 yards. So they could have one person sit in an office and look at the whole state of Tennessee and look at every tower. So it's just a new system that we've brought in that we're going to be using for load shed and peak shedding. And that brings us again to another avenue. So as we go through with TEMA, which eventually, will work us into FEMA, that's with the Bronco itself for communication and things like that, that when the power goes out, whether it be like we see on TV now where they bomb it or whatever, it's still going to have power. We also have, and I'm going to be real short because it's another avenue, but it's not something for us to get into too big here now. But I also designed a cart that's on wheels that you pull, that's closed completely, that you can lock and weatherproof, and that's for disaster relief. Again, TEMA was very interested. I think FEMA will be as well, for refugees or disaster relief. And what entails it there?
Sorry to interrupt. You're demonstrating that you have the ability to adapt to a variety of use cases.
Yes.
And that you're willing to make that R&D investment on your own to demonstrate that you can produce something, and then you bring it forward as a nearly finished product to sell into that market.
Yes,
okay.
and so go ahead. Sorry.
Let's try to talk about the approach that you've taken with federal so far. The last time we spoke, you were describing some connection points that you had within the Department of Homeland Security, maybe some political connections. Maybe you could refresh that for me, and let's see what has evolved in that world.
Okay, so that world, of course, being who I am, I'm learning a lot every day with all of this, with help like yourself and experience like you've done. And with that, we had an investor come to us and basically said, I don't know anything about you except for what I saw on your website. We love the concept, automatic power, no noise, eco-friendly, blah, blah, blah. How can we be a part of this? And I said, I'm open to whatever. Let's get the conversation going and see where it might go. So what they would want to do, and I say they as in that gentleman that I actually contacted me and spoke to, is some sort of a finance something for Biden. So he's like, right in there at the top with the presidency and all of that part of it.
So he's somebody who has political connections because they've been a fundraiser for a presidential campaign. And
so some of his per se things are, he ran the campaign for Al Green. Is it Al Green?
Congressman from
Congress,
Texas.
yes, who is apparently in charge of FEMA, or a big part of FEMA.
He works on an oversight committee in Congress that oversees FEMA. That's correct.
Okay, so that's a connection there, of course. And then, moving up, he's got all kinds of pictures with Biden where he's some sort of financial something, blah, blah, blah. But, I'm getting this from all over, so I absorb it. But,
that's part of the challenge, right? Is to sort through who are these people and what are their roles, and what influence do they have on the process?
Well, and I agree with that 1,000%. And the other thing I'm learning real quickly that I got to figure out each time these people approach me is, what is it that they want? So like this particular gentleman wants a large part of Bronco right off the bat. Well, I'm not, wait a minute. Bronco's
so he's an investor. He's an investor looking for.
Yeah. So he's an investor on one hand that has connections on the other. But when he talks to you in an investor's field like a shark would. And pretty much at this point, what I've done is step back and realize that working with Tree DC and TEMA, or these resiliency plans, and going to the federal government, and I think that's where you can really help me, is, it's much better to go on that level and work our way up than try and jump in on his level, where it seemed like they're just a bunch of sharks that, they're not really worried about what it's doing. It's what can it do for them.
It's a common phenomenon, quite honestly, for companies that have not sold to federal to want to connect at the most senior level they can. And I see that, I think, because in the commercial space, often that senior level decision maker can influence an outcome within a company. It doesn't always work that way in federal. In fact, often it doesn't work that way at all. It's quite common to see an international company, for example, rent a building or lease a building close to the White House because they want that proximity to the senior most power, or what they perceive as the senior most power. When in reality, that the president, as powerful as the president is, does not have the individual power to spend money for the federal government. It's Congress that does that. And that's a harsh lesson for some international companies to learn the first time. So it's not just a matter of getting in at the most senior person's office that you can connect with. You have to understand who has what decision-making authority, and then who has control of particular elements of the budget that oversee whatever the area is, whether it's defense, Navy, Homeland Security, FEMA, Health and Human Services. They're all different. They have a different agency architecture, and they have a different congressional committee oversight architecture. So you're describing a little bit of sifting that is taking place to figure out who's who and who can help whom. And you're finding that some are not in it for the reasons of purity that you might be.
Yes, but it's more of what you said. That gentleman knows Biden. Let's say, for example, wow, that's all the way to the president. But in reality, he's not going to do anything that's going to directly help me tomorrow. Where when I go with my Tree DC gentleman and he gets us an actual meeting with the head of TEMA, that we get to walk in and sit down, and when the meeting's over, everybody says, Billy, I've never seen it go so well. We were in there an hour. He normally gives people 20 minutes, and that's it. That's his schedule. When he sat there and asked you questions and you went to an hour, he's really interested in what's going on. So I realized that, even though that's the head of TEMA instead of the president of the United States, I got an ear here, and he has, like you said, the power to say to his guy, hey, let's look at these for our whatevers and go, and then maybe someday we move up. So I think that the thing that I had to learn was that the title is not always, you don't always want the title at the top, at least with a company my size, because they're, like you said, some of them can afford, or they go rent a whole building. We're very small. We would never do something like that, of course.
Well, and there are literally hundreds of thousands of companies who are working outside the DC environment who sell to federal successfully, but they do it without having an installed footprint within the Beltway. What you're also bumping up against is the expectation that you will align to the federal process that expects that you have correctly identified the need, and that the agency to which you're selling understands the need, and you may be the one that has to explain the need. That need has to be validated with a requirement at the headquarters level of whatever agency, and that requirement is the critical signal that the budget process can request funding for that requirement. So the need, the requirement, and then the funding. But getting into the budget doesn't mean that you're funded. The budget is a request for funding, and that has to go to Congress. So even the president has to ask Congress for funding. Congress evaluates the request and then sends it back to the agency with markups, either pluses or minuses of what was asked for. And when great ideas come forward, funding can be added, potentially at the expense of some other program. Or if a program is underperforming, Congress may take money from those programs that are underperforming. So those that can't meet cost and schedule that was agreed to in a contract, they may find when they look at their budget for the next year, it was cut by Congress or someone else. So there is a process that it appears complex from the outside, but it is quite learnable and not too difficult to understand, but you can't force yourself on it. You have to integrate into it. So where did you leave it with your last meeting with the Department of Homeland Security?
So the Homeland Security in that group, we just basically left that. I wasn't ready to commit to what he wanted to as far as taking over Bronco.
So this was a handler, for lack of a better word,
yes,
who happens to be an investor. He demonstrated connectivity, but he wanted a pretty big piece of the business to do that. Okay, and so you recognize that was not the model that you wanted to follow.
That's correct.
Got it.
So where we went is we had the mayors. Again, a mayor and a president's two different worlds, but we have mayors of cities that reached out and said, wait a minute, we love what you have. We love the idea of, bringing this in for our citizens and our residents. And can you help us, in other words, especially with Tree DC, can you help us figure out a plan for funding? Well, when I actually went to the funding meeting the next day. There was a group of 5 or 6 people that write grants, I guess you would call that. And that was very interesting because they would come up with different, hey, this will fit under this project or this scenario, and they're going to be sending, for the grants. But what I could tell was they almost needed someone like yourself, maybe through me or through a Zoom or whatever, to say, hey guys, you're used to doing state, blah, blah, blah. Maybe this is the route you need to take for this. And that's where, with your expertise, you could help us more on these smaller. And when I say smaller, they're still huge in the real world for Bronco.
Which is often the case, right? So when you talk single digit millions or even tens of millions in the federal picture, that's very small money, but to a small company, that's very big money and life-changing money.
Yes.
Right?
So
Right.
like, for example, that one community of Woodland Mills that has already sent in for the grants and so forth, they're going to be about a 300 units. The units are $6,500 installed. So, for Bronco, that's a big project.
Yes. Yes.
The federal government, the way they said it is, Billy, we do this properly. This is not a big deal for them if they feel like it's granted. What I'm excited about is now that these other mayors have basically seen in the newspaper and so forth what we're doing with this small community.
Yeah.
Now these other mayor, I go to Waco, Texas, the end of this month. Waco, Texas wants to do the same. They have a resiliency program in place, but when they seen what Bronco's doing, they said, would you come and talk to our council? We think that Bronco would be perfect to fit in with our resiliency program. Well, I looked, and what from I could find, there's over 4,000 homes in the Waco area alone that are critical care homes. Not to mention all the other people.
So you are benefiting now from social proof starting to catch fire, and
Yes.
and so this you have, as you're describing, at least three clear market tracks to go down: this state and municipal, the international NGO, and the U.S. federal, if you choose to step back into federal.
Now I do have a fourth that I want to quickly explain and why I'm going to Vegas as of tonight, actually. And that one, I think, again, you could be a great help for us as we put it a little further in place, especially what happened last year in Texas when they lost power for 4 days and so forth. And
Yes.
It now became federal. So what we did was I got with a guy, a company in California, and I said, I want to come up with a way that the Bronco can not only stop or help you when there's a power outage, but also a way to alleviate blackouts. Because here in Texas, it's nothing at 6 o'clock in the evening, without warning, they just shut a whole section of the city's power off, and it could be out for 2 hours. Mm-hmm. So what I came up with is I went to the utility here, Entergy, and I said, if I came up with a way that you could do load shedding and never have to do a blackout, would you be interested? And right away, they got me a meeting with several engineers, and I went up there on the whiteboard and I said, I have a way that it'll work. And I showed them that if they put a Bronco in 1,000 homes around the city, that we hook the Bronco up to your essentials in your home. So that means if the power goes out, the Bronco operates your essentials, your garage door, your refrigerator, your lights, receptacles, TV, Wi-Fi. We'll call that your essentials. What I did, I took it another step further, and I said, when your operator is sitting in his office in the utility and the meter's going too high and he's about to hit the button for a blackout, instead of hitting the button for a blackout and turning everybody's power off, he's going to be able to hit a button on his computer and turn those 1,000 Broncos on. Those Broncos will take all the essential power from each home off of the grid and onto the battery until they reach a certain point, and then they can start turning the Broncos off and they'll be at a level mark. I just joined forces with a company called Virtual Peaker. Virtual Peaker is a company that intertwines my computer stuff and the utility so that it all talks.
I just want to highlight the big difference when you go back to federal to sell is in how you tell this story. So you have a compelling story and you're very close to it. You're emotionally attached to it for good reason, right? You're very proud of what you've developed, and you have something that works, and you know you can solve their problem. In the federal customer constellation, you don't get the same window of opportunity to tell your story. And so it has to be condensed considerably. Now, there are opportunities at trade shows that occur periodically to be in front of some of the decision makers in the government customer constellation. But when you actually go into the meeting with the decision makers and those who are influential in the decision, it really needs to be a tight story. And I try to get companies to get their story down to one single sheet of paper. And that's difficult for most people to do. And it's because we tend to be undisciplined in how we communicate. Just as Americans, that's how we are.
Sure.
So getting it down to a single sheet of paper that has 4 parts. The description of the issue.
That square, that white square.
Yep, you're close.
Is visual of power plant, solar wind, a home in the Bronco. That small explanation.
So I would call that the leave behind.
Okay.
So the government audience, the federal audience, is looking for 4 specific parts. They're looking for the issue to be identified in 1 or 2 sentences.
Okay.
They need to know the background, and yours is fairly intuitive for most people to grab. They need to understand the discussion, like what are the options that are even on the table here? What could we do to solve this problem? And number 4 is the recommendation. So issue, background, discussion, recommendation, 4 parts, single sheet of paper. That's the top cover story. And when you're talking to that federal audience, that's the outline that you're stepping through. You don't want to go off of that in any direction. You can leave material behind. You can leave that flyer behind. You can leave video material behind. You can direct them to a website. You don't want to do that in your first interaction.
Right.
You want to wait for the subsequent opportunity where there is a little more time. But if you can't speak in this language at the federal level, people don't know how to connect, and they'll dismiss you as somebody who doesn't understand their problem and their challenge. And it's unfortunate because a lot of things do just sort of get pushed away. And if you get a meeting, you won't get the second meeting because you weren't, in their eyes, you weren't prepared. So
Right.
you're extremely knowledgeable in this. The challenge is to harness the critical most information so that government buyer can understand it in their own language, and then they can dig into the additional questions. Make sense?
Yeah, 100% that does. And now one of the things I'm doing, actually, it's ironic how you said it. You need to get in front of them at a conference. That's where I'm going tomorrow, is a conference that will have federal, state, all types of different people that are to do with utilities. And we're going to have a connection with, I'm going to call it a partner who does the hardware and software that does the talking back and forth.
So do you have a booth?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
And so are you counting on traffic to come your way, or do people know that you're going to be there? Have you arranged any meetings?
Well, actually what I've got is both. I've got Briggs and Stratton, which you've heard of as a
Sure.
large generator company, who have sent me an email and asked me to set an hour aside for them. I've got 2 people coming from Kohler, another large generator company. Same thing. Could you set a time aside to speak with us? And then I have several from California, mostly distributors of generators. And the reason that California is jumping quick with us is they just passed a law that was signed in that it's now in less than 2 years, there's no longer allowed to be any gas generator, lawnmower, nothing of small engine. So all these generator companies that are selling, the Kohlers and all of this type of thing, it's going to be banned for them in California.
So
And then
Billy, let me,
Yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
gonna just test your readiness here for the surprise visit. What if somebody with the checkbook authority at FEMA walked up to your booth at this trade show, loved what they saw, and asked, can you deliver 1,000 units this fiscal year?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So what we've done is,
So let me pause, let me pause there.
okay,
How much time does that give you? How much time remains in this fiscal year?
I'm assuming this 8 months, 9 months.
Right. So I just wanted to clarify the fiscal year for federal ends September 30th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
Yeah, I would definitely have a lot of questions before I said yes.
yeah.
One
Okay.
would be, of course, with numbers like that, typically like we just did a big project with Howard Hughes. Again, I feel it's a big project. Howard Hughes is a big developer, and they said we want 150 Broncos as soon as we can.
So the next question they would ask is where do you make these?
Yeah, Nashville, Tennessee, in our
And
own facility.
you don't have to answer this for the recording, but how much would it cost? Rough order of magnitude.
Yeah, I have all those numbers.
Okay.
You know,
So
right. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, I sometimes you don't know who's going to walk through a trade show like that especially when it's mixed agency.
Sure.
And so they're testing you when they stop at your booth like that. They're testing to see how vibrant you are, how knowledgeable you are, to see if they won't write a purchase order right there. They typically don't have that authority.
Yes.
But they're going to be careful about how much time they give you based on how you respond to that. Okay.
A lot of those questions, luckily, I get to use the word lucky. I don't like using that word, but I just got back from Florida. Kohler, so one of the, I'm going to say the leading guy at Kohler, that is the man, we'll call him the general manager of all of the commercial accounts, called me out of the blue one day and said, I love what you have. Kohler loves what you have. We have engineers trying to build what you have, and we can't even source the parts for what you can sell it to us for.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to talk to us? The next step was I spoke to this gentleman again on the phone a couple times, Zoom like we are, and he said, Billy, you know something? I've got a group in Florida who, when I mentioned this, did cartwheels. Part of what that group in Florida does, and I can tell you, is they are responsible for the building, upkeep, maintenance, the whole shoot match for over 3,000 cell towers in the US. The reason that he deals with them, again, is the Kohler gas generators. And even as a Kohler salesman, he said, Billy, I don't mind telling you, 1,000 of those 3,000 are a pain in all of our necks because we can't do the maintenance. I'm going to give you their number if it's okay. You please call them, and you need to talk to them. They've got a lot of things they'd like to talk about. So a lot of those questions that you asked me on the big scale, we've done a lot of homework on in the last few weeks for that group. So that allows me to be able to talk to someone like you mentioned and give them a legitimate, real answer.
How many other Billies are there to service these different channels of sales? So
we have full-time staff, myself, my guy in Nashville, who we call him, he's our operations manager. And I have a young lady here in Houston who's full-time with us. That's all we have as a
pretty lean. Yeah.
Pretty lean. But what we've done is we've got everything in place that, let's say tomorrow somebody needs 500 Broncos. We've already got the location, trained labor ready to go, because the way we set it up is everything we do with my main guy, Dan, is we know how much a screw costs, how long it takes to screw it in, and what one man can do, 2, 3, and we all have it charted out that if we need 25 a week or 100 a week, we've got our next door to our facility is a small partner with us who owns a solar company who has 16 guys working for him. So what we've done is we've taken each guy individually and had him work with our guy, so that if we need them tomorrow to help blow this up, we have that in place.
So Billy, what's coming into focus for me is that you have these multiple near-term opportunities in motion and and it looks like backlog is about to build quickly in those channels.
Yes.
What if I could help you position yourself to be ready with the right one or two agencies of the most interest at the federal level that will unfold more slowly, but may actually be very substantial and continuous lines of revenue going forward?
Absolutely would love that. I mean, that's as you heard my story, the one thing that we don't have is that next step that you're talking. We've got it all the way up to we figured out we can build them and produce them, even install. I even have installers if that's what they wanted. What we need is that person, like you're saying, that says, "Here's a PO. Here's how many we would like every quarter."
Right. Right.
That's what we're waiting for. Absolutely, yes.